if we look at the regulator on our acetylene tank, all regulators have two sections, so we'll talk about this in a second. A working pressure and a tank pressure. Notice on the working pressure that when you get to 15, it starts redlining. That's not cool. Okay, it's not a tack that you're out there, spinning the tires. This is dangerous. So you don't want to get it up to that point. And we'll talk about the proper settings when we get to that. Open the valve a quarter turn. So a little bit different than oxygen this time. That's why, again, you have to understand the difference. Say, wow, whatever, I'll just open them up and, no. Oxygen's all the way, acetylene's a quarter turn. All right, let's go down to our regulators. You're going to spend a lot of time with these. And at first it can seem clumsy and confusing, and then pretty soon you're going to be back there and it's going to be like, no problem. Just do it, don't even think about it anymore. All right, so you have two purposes for your regulators. We want to make sure you write both these things down. Number one is to reduce the high cylinder pressure to a low working pressure. Reduce the high cylinder pressure to a low working pressure. Imagine 2,600 PSI coming out the end of that hose. I don't know what that looks like. I mean, it's like a fire truck, hose. I mean, it's just, you can't control it. So we don't want 2,600 coming out of this tank. We want to bring it down to the working pressure. And what do I want to work with? Not how much is inside the tank. Second purpose of the regulator is to maintain an even flow of those pressures. To maintain an even flow of those pressures. When we get to the part of lighting the torch, we're going to adjust our valves to get a neutral flame. It's kind of a delicate process. Got to get it just right. Okay, once you got it, then you're good. You can go ahead and weld. Imagine if you don't have a regulator, then regulating the amount of flow coming down to your torch. It's up and it's down. It's up and it's down. And this thing's, right? You'd never be getting done. You're a mess. So not only does it bring down our cylinder pressure to a working pressure, it maintains that. Okay, it keeps that at a constant level until obviously your tank starts running dry. Then you're going to start to see a drop in pressure because you're just out of gas. Okay? Then we got to replace your tank and get you up and running again. All right, so you got two sections of your regulator. You have your cylinder pressure gauge and you have your working pressure gauge. And if you would prefer to call it a tank, I'm okay with that. I call it a cylinder. If you want to call it a tank pressure gauge, go for it. Okay? I'm not going to count that against it. Cylinder pressure gauge, a working pressure gauge. So I'll kind of give you an up close look at an old regulator I have here. Notice it doesn't matter if we're looking at this one, this one, this one, from where you're looking at it, the left side. Okay, the left side is your working pressure. That's what's coming out the end of your hose. The right side is always going to be your cylinder pressure. That's the one that tells you how much gas do I actually have inside that tank. It's like my gas gauge, basically. So when I install the regulator on a brand new tank and I open the valve for the first time, what do I see in my cylinder pressure gauge? What reading am I going to get?
Probably maxed out.
What's that?
It's probably maxed out.
Yeah, what's that number?
2,600.
2,000 to 2,600, right? Because that's my max. And then as we consume, it's going to slowly drop. Now, usually you can't get everything out of it. Okay, it's not like a car where you can drop it down to nothing and then you just run out of gas. It typically gets to a point where you just get to maybe like 200, 300, and then you just can't, it's just not enough pressure anymore. Okay, you can't build up enough pressure to work, and then it's just done. Okay, I wish my grill had this. you know? So when I look in there before I start cooking, I can know if I'm gonna run out or not, but, so it's kinda nice to have this. Now, in your booth area, it's misleading. Your, cylinder pressure side is gonna read 0. She's like, what? No pressure? That's just because there's a different setup outside that hooks everything up. So disregard that back there. But you will have your working pressure side. That'll always be there. All right? Oxygen has right-handed threads, and acetylene has left-handed threads. So oxygen has right-handed threads, which are your typical, if you're screwing things together. Acetylene is left or opposite. Very smart. Okay, I would like to know if they started that way back when they first did this. Because you don't want to hook an oxygen part up to something that's for acetylene. But if the threads were exactly the same, you could easily just hook stuff up and let her rip, right? I can't put an acetylene hose on an oxygen regulator. It won't let me. Okay, the threads don't match. And then this part right here, this is called your regulator screw. This is what you use to adjust your working pressure. You're going to get very familiar with that. That's like your accelerator, You're going to get used to adjusting this to get to the right pressure on your cylinder. All right, let's go down to the hoses. Oxygen is green. Acetylene is red. Very visual. Never have to guess. If I see green, it's going to be oxygen. If I see red, it's going to be acetylene. Same with the gauges. Red gauges, green gauges. Everything is very simple. Okay? Just once you know this, you can't screw it up. It's like oxygen is green. It's green. It's green. Everything's green. Okay? We talked briefly about this, but just investigate your hoses every once in a while. Are there cracks? Is it scorched? When you walk back there, do you see a big burn mark on it? Because I've watched this happen. Okay? Hoses are hanging on the wall back there. Person's welding, and they're doing a great job. Doing everything right. And they finish welding, and they want to see how they did. So they do one of these things, where they go, yeah, nice weld. The whole time the torch is blowing right at the hose. It's like, seriously? Like there's nothing stopping it from here, okay? We can stop the flame here, but once you get into this part, okay, it's either gonna travel itself back to the tank, or most likely it's just gonna be this flame thing, whipping around, which may sound like a good time, but I don't think so. Anyway, watch out for that. If you see it scorched, we may want to investigate that hose, make sure there's no burns going through it, or things like that. And in the last part there, the torch controls the gas supply with 2 valves. You got your oxygen and acetylene valves. That's how you're going to bring it down to your neutral flame. You have what's called the barrel. That's the part that you hold on to. So at the bottom you've got your oxygen and acetylene, then you got your barrel. And then in this case you have your welding tip or a cutting torch end, depending on what you're working on. So if you look at here, these were the old torches. I just got rid of those 2-3 years ago and went with the new ones. Couldn't really get parts for these anymore. When you do your performance test, first step is to open your acetylene quarter turn, and then you gotta pay attention, like, okay, which one is it, right? After you do it a bunch of times, you just know. You grab, you know what you're doing. But so you got your 2 valves. If you wanted to change your welding tips, there's this little collar on here. You loosen that up, and then you just pull that welding tip out, and then you would replace it with a different one. Or if you wanted to do some cutting, like that, then you would put your cutting end on there. How many of you fired one of these up before? Okay. My challenge to you is by the time you leave, you've done that, okay? So if I ask you in January, you'll all go, yep, done that, okay? We don't cut metal this way because it doesn't turn out very good, but it's kind of fun to try it out, okay? There's different settings for your regulators for this, but that's how you'd swap them out. There are numbers on the welding tip. This one has a number stamped on it, 205. You're gonna see 201s, you're gonna see 203s. Lower the number, colder the flame, okay? When we start those rotations, I'm going to force you on one day of that beginning rotation, I'm gonna say, here's a 203, go make some puddles with it. That's all you're gonna get that day, okay? Then the next day, I'm gonna say, give me that 203 back. Now here's a 5, go do that. You go back there, and then after those 2 days, you'll be like, okay, a 5 does this and a 3 does that. Okay, it's going to be very clear to you which one is which. Some of you are going to prefer to use a 3, some of you a 5. Okay, you'll find that out, but you'll find that on your welding tip. All right, so if you flip your page, the one that I was talking about at the beginning of the hour, that's your identification sheet. We'll go through that on Monday. That is exactly the same page that's on the test. Flip your page one more time. You'll see the steps involved for lighting the torch. We're going to go through that on Monday as well. That's the same exact sheet that's going to be on your test. People are not always happy with me that you are required to do the written part along with the performance test and say, Derby, I know what I'm doing. I'll just show you. Isn't that good enough? That's great. Okay, yes, you do need to show me that. I have to have written proof that you have completed it. I can't just say, yeah, he showed me one day. It doesn't work. Okay, I have to have documentation that you've done it. And it's a great way for you to really solidify those steps as you write them out. So, anyway, that gets us through today. Monday we'll finish them up.